Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. You're watching PTV World's Newsroom and I'm your host, Khalid. But today is Monday, the 22nd of May, 2023. We've got lots to discuss with you. So without further ado, these are the stories that will be under discussion during the course of tonight's newsroom. We'll begin with the Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Saab, who on Sunday has said that New Delhi will not be able to suppress the voice of the Kashmiris by holding a meeting of tourism officials from G20 countries in Srinagar, the capital of the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. He said, quote unquote, that it is not possible for India to play an important role in the world by violating the United Nations resolutions. They said today is the day when this summit is to start in the Indian Hell Valley. It's a two-day summit which will go on until Wednesday. And of course, there are a lot of countries that are either not attending or are sending low-level delegations. This has also been confirmed by the Hindustan Times. We've also had China that has given a very firm statement and of course is not attending. Then there are the countries like Indonesia, like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Egypt also, who as per Indian media reports might not be attending directly this event. Let's see what happens. We'll be of course updating you as and when. But of course there's also a huge strike across the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the Azad Jammu and Kashmir today to highlight what India is doing by normalizing this brutalization of people in the Indian Hell Valley. This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns climate change and the impact on Pakistan. We have seen the floods that happened last year. We've seen how they've been affected. We have also recently seen a report that has come out that warns of certain events that could happen in the coming months. We're not sure for the moment, but we need to be careful and ready for such events if and when they do happen. Climate change is something that the world has been affected by, although the world is not reacting the way it needs to, but countries like Pakistan bear the brunt of it despite the fact that we emit less than 1% of carbon. This is going to be our second segment. Our third story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif Saab, who is in Quetta on a day-long visit where he inaugurated the 34th National Games. He talked about the importance of sports and while speaking on the occasion, of course, he also held important meetings with the governor of Balochistan as well as the local PMLN leaders. We'll be talking about this speech in our third story. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about a heartwarming event that happened in Kartarpur. Not the first time it has happened, but it always warms the heart when you hear about it and when you see how it affects humankind. Now, a brother and a sister who had been separated 75 years ago have now been reunited thanks to the Kartarpur corridor and also thanks to the power of social media. Mahinder Kaur, 81, and 78-year-old Sheikh Abdul Aziz, who is now in Kashmir, were reunited after 75 years. Thanks to social media, thanks to the Kartarpur corridor. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns the G20 summit that is being held in the Indian Hell Valley, and of course how the Muslim world as well as Pakistan and the Kashmiris across the globe are reacting to it. More the following report.
The Modi-led Indian regime has turned an illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir into military fortress on the occasion of the G20 meeting, starting from today with a key member China along with Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Egypt staying away from it. In an attempt to depict false normalcy in occupied valley, the third meeting of the G20 Tourism Working Group under India's presidency is being held from the 22nd to the 24th of May in Srinagar. Since the Indian government started preparations for G20 meeting, atrocious reports of human rights violations continue to pour in from northern and southern parts of the valley and Muslim-majority areas adjacent to line of control, where the Indian Army and its paramilitary forces have been conducting frequent raids and search operations. Prisons and torture centres in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are full of innocent victims who have been arrested by Indian occupation forces since preparations for holding the G20 event began in the territory. United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Deverenes, issued a statement last week accusing India of seeking to normalise the brutal and repressive denial of democratic and other rights of Kashmiri Muslims and minorities by holding the G20 meeting there. While the cosmetic beautification campaign in Srinagar and other places goes under full glare of the media, what is really happening behind the scenes in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is horrendous. That must be a cause of serious concern for all, especially the G20 nations.
Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, former ambassador, joins us online. Dr. Saab, it's a pleasure to have you on board to talk about important international issues, and I also saw your article that you had published on G20 this morning. Now, speaking of this G20 summit that is being held in the Indian held Valley, do you feel that India has been successful as far as its heinous designs to normalize the situation in the Indian held Valley is concerned?
I think it has fired back this time in particular. They've been able to cover up at the Security Council level and at some time at the General Assembly level. But this time it has really bounced back. How it has bounced back? One, that they were not expecting there would be abstinence by certain countries like China, Saudi Arabia, Egypt as a guest member or an observer member, and followed by Turkey. So they were not expecting that. As a matter of fact, there are about 9 members, 3 the permanent member of G20, and 6 are the guest members. And my idea and my apprehension is that they have sent a very low level, not official delegation, the remaining about 4 countries, not like Nigeria, like Mauritius, and like some other countries. They have just sent their tour operators, the civilians, the private organizations at the most, and that could be an industry interest of them. So what has emerged out of it? As a matter of fact, it has endorsed. India wanted an endorsement that Kashmir is normal. There is no disturbance in Kashmir. There is no disturbance and there is no fortification in Kashmir. What has happened is even the bunkers which has been constructed by the security forces, they have covered those bunkers with beautiful covers, and welcoming G20. But people, the world is not really that naive that they would not understand what India is trying to do there. So there are a couple of things I just quickly like to highlight here. There are about 100 meetings across India, and there are about 60 delegations of various working group and various to attend various agenda points of G20. And then this is one of them, which is our tourism, the working group. India purposely tried, and rather very wickedly tried, and that's what I've mentioned in my article also, that they wickedly tried to give it a cover. And that's what the report here of United Nations, some of the human rights organizations, they have said that India wants to have an endorsement or an approval or a seal of the international community, giving an impression that everything is normal, which did not happen somehow because these very delegations, and there's some reports also emerging that the roads are closed, the traffic, civilian traffic is not seen there, the schools are shut, and there is a massive invisible police deployment there. People are receiving threatening calls. The Kashmiris are receiving threatening calls that no one is going to really participate in any protest and any procession. And then it has become like a graveyard. Media people are also restricted there. There are so many preventive apprehensions, the arrest. So hundreds of people have been detained. Thousands have received the threatening phone call. So the world has started getting to know about it. But the good thing is that some of the political work, in fact, Pakistan did a lot of advocacy on it. There could have been more room for very aggressive advocacy of Kashmir. But last couple of months, and the Foreign Office has been able to do that. And as a result, the world has been reminded. In fact, diplomacy is a name of continuity and the name of consistency. So we understand sometimes we get disheartened that, look, there are so many reports of Human Rights Commission. We have submitted to the United Nations 131 pages dossier. and there have been all these atrocities which what the world has, particularly what we have been discussing at various channels, and that's what people have been writing, including myself, about Kashmir. So that adds to the efforts of international organizations like Amnesty International, like Human Rights, and also some of the international organization. It adds value to the consistency in such kind of a diplomacy,
I
because
understand,
India.
Dr. Saab, that it adds value to the consistency and, of course, all the reports that Pakistan has prepared as well as the international human rights organizations. But despite that, we see a lot of countries in the West not having a very proactive, attitude as far as pressurizing India into changing its narrative towards Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. In fact, this very narrative that India is building by having a meeting on tourism in the Indian held valley is trying to normalize a situation that is far from normal in the Indian held valley. Do you feel the world will accept more or less this narrative that India is trying to build up, or do you feel there's a general consensus whether there might be an open reaction or not by the world bodies that what India is doing is wrong?
What we are witnessing now and what we are discussing at this time, these are the points which are normally added to the minds and hearts of the people. Now, there are three ways that such points are raised. And number one, that public diplomacy, and which includes the media coverage, which includes the lectures in the universities, which include through the embassies, various campaigns in various countries. And then is a traditional diplomacy, like I'm sure that our embassies, and particularly embassies located in the countries which represent G20 and which represent the guest members of G20. So through traditional diplomacy, they are reminded, they are informed that there are two volumetric Human Rights Commission report, not drawn by Pakistan, drawn by the international organization, Human Rights Council, and which contains following things like blinding people, extrajudicial killing, and rape, plus arrests of thousands and thousands of people, and all those atrocities which has been mentioned not only in those two reports but also in on a comprehensive report of the Secretary General, which was published only last year. So these points are highlighted through the traditional diplomacy. Then comes the legal diplomacy, and this is what it has worked this time. Every time Pakistan reminded the world community that it's against the international law, against the Security Council resolutions, that India could hold such an activities just to try and cover up its atrocities in Kashmir, in occupied Kashmir. So that way, once these countries who have refrained, they found out that yes, it is legally, it would be contravention, it would be a violation of the international law if they attended. And China very vehemently has given its point of view. The other countries, I'm sure, they had this factor, the legal diplomacy factor in their mind. So to conclude the answer, to your question, I would say that yes, this is how we can build up the pressure. Now, how the decision can be made, that's a different ball game altogether.
True.
The decision, if we are able to build, and that is documented sufficiently, not by Pakistan only, but it's sufficiently documented by the Amnesty International, by the Human Rights Organization, more importantly, by the UN organ, that is a Human Rights Council. And though that has tabulated, that's an official record. If the case is built and submitted to the Security Council, if the case is built and submitted to the General Assembly, if the case is built to the working committee of the OIC, and OIC holds a meeting and passes a resolution, sends it to the General Assembly, or moves a resolution in Security Council, although it would be vetoed by most probably US, United States, and some maybe one or two allies of it. But General Assembly, it would build further pressure, and there are mechanisms that how if the resolution passed by General Assembly and sent to the Security Council to reconsider, if it is not once again discussed in Security Council, what are the consequences of it? All those things are all framed. It's just a matter of pursuing the legal diplomacy slightly more heavily. And that for that, it's not only Pakistan alone. Pakistan is trying its best. Maybe a little more efforts are required through the traditional diplomacy and through the public diplomacy. What happens is they all are connected. If there is a public diplomacy, if they people around the world, particularly those who are the proponent of the human rights and those countries who really always do the advocacy for the human right, in those countries, if these points are really presented properly through the public diplomacy, then what happens? Then in that case, it's the bottoms up pressure. It's the pressure of the public to their respective government.
But
Even
Dr.
if they are
Jamil, the
the
pressure of
Security
the
Council.
public has always been there in Pakistan. The public has always supported, every government has always supported the stance of the Kashmiris, the stance of the desire for self-determination, the resolution for self-determination, so many resolutions that are there in the United Nations. And you talked about a very important word, that was advocacy. Now, Pakistan's advocacy as far as this issue is unparalleled, if I can use that word. Lately also, we've seen Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, our foreign minister, who is there in Muzaffarabad. He addressed the Azad Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly, and in fact the first by a foreign minister, in which he said that he was here to express solidarity with the people of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and also that history cannot be changed. And this is exactly what India is trying to do, change the course of history. Will it succeed in your point of view?
No, that advocacy, so far as Pakistan is concerned, yes, and even this one, the foreign minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, he has really very forcefully and at this occasion has gone to Azad Kashmir and has been able to project the point of view which we have been projecting, such as the Security Council resolution, its violation, such as the change in demography. So this is against the Geneva Convention, Article 49. And this is what he was referring to, plus the change of demography of any disputed place. It attracts the war crime article, which is Article 20. All these things are connected, very well done. But the fact of the matter is, he has also spoken some of the points very strongly, that the support of Kashmiris would always be there from Pakistan, and Pakistan would always side with the legitimate struggle. And that also connects with the General Assembly Resolution 2649. In 2649, all countries of the member countries of United Nations, they are obliged to help the freedom fighters. Now, that resolution was passed in 1975, and its further debate documents, it speaks or it suggests that with all kind of efforts, with all kind of support, what is required by the freedom fighter. So this is what Bilawal Bhutto Zardari was mentioning in a very diplomatic manner, and that is how it should be done. But it's only Pakistan. These things, if it start, what I was mentioning was bottoms up pressure in those countries who are the member of the Security Council.
What about the United Nations? What about the United Nations, Dr. Jamil? We have all read and we've all discussed in the past as well the statement by Fernand de Waaren, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on minority issues, in which he has criticized heavily the decision by India to have a summit or a part of the summit in the Indian-held valley, trying to normalize a situation that is not normal at all. How important is the role of the United Nations, the various resolutions that have been there as far as the Indian-held valley is concerned? Do you feel the United Nations has managed to expose India's true face? Will it continue to do so?
In order to respond to this question, I have to describe what United Nations is. United Nations has two components, major components. One is the Secretariat. The other one is its political component, which is the Security Council and the General Assembly. So, on a special report here is part of the Secretariat, and Secretariat is not mandated to impose anything from their side. They can only give their reports, they can only highlight those things, and they can only refer to the human rights violation, but they cannot invoke Chapter 5 of the Charter of United Nations. They can't invoke Chapter 6 of the Charter of United Nations. They can't invoke Chapter 7, which is forceful implementation of the Security Council resolution. So the United Nations, what normally concept we have and perception we have that United Nations, Secretary General can sit and decide, he is not mandated to that. And likewise, all the members of the Secretariat, they can speak their mind, but that adds value to it. Finally and ultimately, it's the Security Council which can invoke Chapter 6, which means sanctions, and it's the Security Council which can invoke Chapter 7, and even the last step of Chapter 7 is that the United Nations peace forces can be launched there to implement the United Nations Security Council resolution. But in order to do that, you have to have members, the Security Council members, to pass the resolution and without vetoing. And that
the procedure and normal. In the past, how the United Nations Security Council has moved as far as India is concerned. But let's hope, let's expect a bright future. Let's hope for a bright future. We all go forward with the hope, the desire that finally some sanity prevails within the Security Council, and also we have seen an example through India having this summit in the Indian Hill Valley, and how so many countries have either not attended or are sending low-level delegations. So there is a direct or indirect message that is being sent to India that you need to put your house in order, and you need to give the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir the right to self-determination. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan Sahab, to have joined us and talk candidly about the G20 summit in Srinagar that is starting today. It will go on till Wednesday. We will be updating you on who's attending and who's not in the next few days. Let's come to our second segment, and that concerns climate change with respect to Pakistan. We've seen the floods in 2022, and again now the Met Department forecasts a very hot weather that will grip most parts of the country. We are seeing the hot temperatures in Lahore, in Islamabad, in different other cities, and the repercussions of those could be devastating. More in the following report.
The apocalyptic rains and floods that hit Pakistan last summer claimed 1,700 lives, left a swathe of territory the size of Switzerland underwater, and affected 33 million people. Pakistan has suffered not just from flooding but from recurrent climate extremes. Earlier in spring 2022, the country was in the grip of a scorching, drought-aggravating heatwave that caused forest fires in the west. The National Disaster Management Authority has warned provinces to gear up for extreme climate events this year, including intensive heat waves, extraordinary snow melting, landsliding, flash floods, forest fires and cyclones. Since 1959, Pakistan has accounted for 0.4% of historic emissions, and yet it's listed as one of the most climate vulnerable places in the world, according to joint findings by the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. A top United Nations panel of scientists, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has warned that humanity still has a chance, close to the last, to prevent the worst of climate change's future harms. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres cautioned that humanity is on thin ice and that ice is melting fast. Wealthier states that have responsibility for climate change must remedy historic injustices and support low-emitting countries like Pakistan to attain climate resilience.
We discuss more on this very important issue that has gripped Pakistan since last year and even before, and could grip is in the coming months as well. We've been joined by Sara Hayat. She's a climate change specialist. Sara, thank you very much to have joined us. Sara, when the NDMA says that we need to have extreme level of preparedness in order to thwart any events that could happen because of climate change, because of the extreme temperatures, what is the NDMA referring to? What kind of preparations do we need to take?
Hi, thanks for having me. So, as far as preparations for climatic events are concerned, they're dependent on the geography and the topography of the region. So, for example, the preparations that Sindh will need to make will differ from what Punjab needs to make because Sindh is bordering the Arabian Sea. And so, if we are expecting cyclones in Sindh, then we need emergency shelters, for example, and most likely these will be schools, as opposed to Gilgit-Baltistan or no other northern areas where GLOFs or glacial lake outburst floods are a climatic threat that we are experiencing very seriously. And for those, we need evacuation plans. But I think what by and large what is really needed is for local union councils to be engaged and for them to interact with the general population and to get them on board and to raise awareness on the issue. Because without sort of trickling down the awareness to a grassroots level, we don't really stand a chance no matter how good our policies are.
Now, Sara, also we've read so many reports as far as climate change and the effects that it could have on the world is concerned. We've seen what Pakistan has gone through. We also see what the NDMA says, that we could be, witnessing intensive heat waves, extraordinary snow melting, landsliding, flash floods, forest fires, cyclones. These are probabilities, but these are the events that could happen in Pakistan, and that too because of climate change, and that too because of something that Pakistan is not the reason for. Now, the United Nations Panel of Scientists, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has warned that humanity still has a chance to prevent the worst of climate change future harms. But is the world cognizant? Is the world ready to take that chance, to take the necessary measures?
Well, that's a great question. I think by and large, the world is more prepared and more aware or cognizant than it was in the preceding years. And mostly because for many countries, we're living climate change. Like Pakistan, we live climate change on a daily basis. Like the floods we experience, our air quality levels, the heat waves. And this is not just sort of exclusive to Pakistan, it's across a couple of other countries, more on the developing or the agricultural side. But and as far as other countries being responsible for it is concerned, I think that narrative now should be toned down at some level. I personally do feel that, because unless we stop blaming other countries, we won't be able to get our own house in order. And what we need are strong adaptive and mitigative measures in Pakistan to deal with what we're experiencing. And as far as other countries are concerned, of course, they need to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. There's just no two ways about it.
That is true, Sara, and I agree with you on that. I really hope that the important countries that are major carbon emitters to take the necessary measures, which we don't see them taking. Now, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has recently also talked about the world that is on thin ice, humanity that rather is on thin ice, quote unquote, and that ice is melting fast, quote unquote. I mean, and that we are also seeing, whether it be Pakistan, whether it be other places where the glaciers are very rapidly melting. Do you, I mean, we've talked about the reality of climate change. The world is cognizant of that, but is it acting on that or not is another question altogether. Does the world also know, whether it be in this side of the south or the global north, do they understand the implications that climate change could have for thousands of years if the necessary action is not taken?
I would say they're aware because most research does stem from the global north. But whether they want to take action on it, I mean, I think that would vary from economy to economy, because for them to sort of stop their economic development because the global south is suffering, I think that would be unrealistic to expect from them. However, if you do want to consider the comment by the Secretary of the United Nations and talk about thin ice, ice is something that's very sort of threatening for Pakistan specifically because of our geographic location on the planet. This part of the world, or the globe, hosts the third largest ice mass in the world after the North and the South Pole, which basically translates into 8,000 glaciers that we have. These glaciers are melting at unprecedented levels. Some of these were responsible for the flooding in 2022, where where a lot of water came downstream and then sort of raised the levels in rivers. We already have about 44 glacial lake outburst floods, or GLOFs, which are very active and prone to flooding. So ice is a real concern for us. I mean, it's not for a lot of other countries, but for Pakistan and this part of the world, it's a really serious threat.
Sara, apart from Pakistan, which other countries do you feel are going to really bear the brunt of climate change in the coming years? And how do you feel this climate crisis that Pakistan, amongst other countries, has gone through, has shaped the world's global economy in the past year and currently as well?
So countries that are vulnerable or susceptible to climate change, generally they've been identified via scientific methods. The German Watch releases a report every year identifying the most vulnerable countries. And unfortunately for us, Pakistan almost always makes, and has been for the last 10 odd years or so, been making the list in the top, and has been coming in the top 10 most impacted countries by climate change. Other countries include Bangladesh, low-lying island nation states, basically Mauritius, Maldives, countries that are surrounded and submerged by water. They will be most affected and are most impacted. But I think what's important to understand is why, and I'm going to narrow this discussion down to Pakistan, it's important to understand is why we are so impacted. And we're so vulnerable to climate change because, again, our topography is such. It's eclectic and we're blessed with it, but it's also now sort of showing its negative side. We have glaciers in the north, we've got the Arabian Sea in the south, we've got rivers and deserts, and all of these are natural sort of, all of these react to climate change and make the impacts worse. And then we have a very large population, one of the fifth largest in the world at this point. So the higher the number of people in any given region, the more people will be impacted by climate change. We have low literacy levels in the country, which automatically means lower awareness. So all of these factors sort of come together and make Pakistan very vulnerable to climate change. And then, of course, political and economic instability makes it tough for us to deal with the impacts of climate change.
Now, you talk of the different vulnerabilities that Pakistan is subject to, and that causes certain lacunas as far as Pakistan's response to climate change is concerned. Now, I'd also like to refer to what happened in Pakistan because of the floods and the huge economic impact that we've had. We've gone to the COP, we've gone to the United Nations, we've had different sessions, we've had different countries pledge for Pakistan. What, in your point of view, to date has been the response of the international community regarding the technical and other kind of assistance and funding to Pakistan following these floods?
So I think initially the international community really did step up for us. And I think some countries in particular, like Turkey, even the United States, they really did sort of send aid our way. Malaysia sent aid our way. And we took it and we used it. And so flood relief and flood response, or even any natural disaster relief mechanism is divided into short-term and then long-term planning. And for us, the short term we're done with. You know, we got the food, we got the medical aid out, we got the food out, we gave temporary relief shelter to people. But now what we need is long-term planning, and so we basically need houses. We need livelihood opportunities for the 33 million or so impacted. We need infrastructure development. And as far as I know, I think the World Bank and international development organizations, the UNDP, they are pooling in money into the country and they are trying to do work. And also, I would not like to miss out on the local organizations within Pakistan that are working to repair the flood damage.
Of course, their contribution has been immense as well, not only to inform the local public, but also the regional and international public about what Pakistan is going through and the mechanisms that are being put into place. The World Economic Forum, Sara, has released its Climate Risk Report 2023 that talks about these risks that will transcend national boundaries and cannot be addressed by one country alone, like, for example, Pakistan alone or any other country that is impacted by it. We have also seen recently what happened in the United States of America. What are regional approaches, in your point of view, to cooperate as far as climate adaptation is concerned?
Right, great question. So the reason I think transboundary cooperation is important is because, and I think this is a fact that gets missed out, is basically, and just to simplify it very much, greenhouse gases emitted in Beijing can affect Karachi. So they sort of like greenhouse gases sort of rise and then they spread from any region and they can have an impact in any part of the world. And for that reason, we need transboundary sort of agreements and understanding between countries, because everybody, the neighbors are affecting each other, and even countries far off are affecting each other. And this is not a new concept. In 1991, for example, the United States and Canada entered into an air quality agreement to control transboundary air pollution and acid rain. And I think this was revised subsequently as well. And I think with the kind of air pollution crisis that Pakistan and especially both the Punjabs, both sides of the border face, a regional collaboration or an agreement, I think would go a long way. It would benefit both the countries.
That is so true. But also, there are several adverse regional trends that are slowly and steadily becoming stronger. Pakistan has had a lot of issues, whether it concerns water availability, agriculture input, groundwater depletion. Do you feel that countries like Pakistan need non-traditional approaches in order to, tackle climate change in the present and in the future?
So I think a non-traditional approach would, in today's day and age, just be climate diplomacy, really. I don't think we could term it anything else. And for Pakistan, climate diplomacy has been, it's been one of our strategies. We've used it before. The United States has invested heavily in renewable energy in the country because of climate diplomacy. Then our tree plantation got us a lot of international acclaim. And then even now in the last COP, and that was just part and parcel of climate diplomacy, wasn't it? But I think if you're looking at some other non-traditional sort of approach, then I believe that the Indus Water Treaty does come to mind. I think we need to hone in on it. We need to make sure that it's not violated, its provisions are upheld. Water insecurity in this part of the region is a major cause for political strife, and we do need to sort of make sure there's equitable distribution of water. And so we need like a neutral mediator on that ground and for the Indus Water Treaty, and to ensure that any dams that are being constructed or that are being considered for construction in Afghanistan also do not impair water flow in Pakistan, then so be it. I think we maybe do need some kind of like a mediator to ensure that all countries get equitable water.
Now, let's refer to another report by the World Bank's Country Climate and Development section that for Pakistan says that Pakistan needs a lot of money. And when we talk of funds, we talk about $152 billion as per that report for climate adaptation and $196 billion for decarbonization over the next 10 years. Do you feel that we can garner these investments as per mentioned in the report easily? Do you feel we need to use measures more aggressively, more proactively, more diplomatically? How should we move ahead in order to garner these funds that are quite immense, that are huge to say the least?
No, they are huge, and so under the Paris Agreement, the certain countries which are being termed the developed nations, and Pakistan, the developing nations, and Pakistan does make the list, are entitled to funds from the developed world to combat the climate crisis, and not just that, the Green Climate Fund and then other sources also do make Pakistan eligible for this kind of funding. But I think in order to secure these funds, we would have to have a very sort of clean-cut, prioritized strategy within the country. And that means putting climate change on the front burner as opposed to the back burner. So we do need to have identified projects, both on the mitigative, which is basically curbing and controlling greenhouse gas emissions, and on the adaptive side, so adapting to climate change. We need very sound investment, and we need sort of technical planning, and I don't think securing funds will be as big of a hurdle if we have a sound strategy in mind and if we can deliver on it also.
All right. Last question, Sara. I'd like a short answer to this. Do you feel climate crisis can stall progress on economic development and poverty reduction? We are seeing also a report that talks about by the World Bank that estimates that Pakistan's GDP might decrease by at least 18 to 20% by 2050 because of this. What's your take on this?
Yeah, definitely. So the climate change and the economy are very closely entwined. And the reason for this is, let me just give examples and sort of curb the answer a little. For example, heat waves. A report by McKinsey suggests that it's going to become so hot that laborers and farmers won't be able to work, which means our agricultural productivity will decrease. And then with climate change, malaria and dengue and other vector-borne diseases increase and grow a lot. So again, the health in the country will be impacted. And water scarcity is linked to climate change. We need water almost more than any, other countries because we're an agro-based economy. So then so that affects economic productivity. And then floods and natural disasters. Every time a natural disaster will come, it'll set back the economy and impact us for years ahead. So climate change, in a nutshell, definitely, without controlling its effects, we cannot save the economy and we can't thrive.
All right. I mean, that is so true. There are a lot of truths that are in front of us, but that needs a collective approach, a regional approach, a global approach in order to thwart the future of the world and all the effects that climate change could have. Thank you so very much, Sara, Hayat, environmentalist, climate change specialist, to have joined us and to have talked to us about. Let's come to our last two stories very quickly. The first is the visit to Quetta by our Prime Minister, Mr. Shehbaz Sharif, where he inaugurated the 34th National Games as well, and he vowed while addressing these games to utilize all the possible resources to promote sports activities in the country. He said the federal government will spare no effort to help the provincial government of Balochistan to revive sports and recreational activities for the youth. He also said capacity building of the youth and provision of better opportunities were the topmost priorities of the government, and I think these are the priorities that are the need of the day as well. This was our Prime Minister in Quetta on a day's visit, and of course the national games, as any sports, are important for the youth of our country as well. Let's come to our last story, and our last story concerns two brothers and sisters who were reunited after a period of 75 years, thanks to social media and also thanks to the Kartarpur corridor. Now, this lady, Mahinder Kaur, who is now 81 years of age, made the journey from India to Gurdwara Darbar Sahib Kartarpur via the Kartarpur corridor. Also 78-year-old Sheikh Abdul Aziz arrived in Kartarpur with his family from Azad Kashmir. Their reunion was heartwarming. There were a lot of embraces, hugs, recollection of old times, but that is what the reunions are nevertheless. But what's also important is that how important platforms such as social media, or how such places that now are the platform for reuniting people such as the Kartarpur corridor can play an important role for reuniting old friends, old siblings and family. Isn't it heartwarming at the end of the day when you see two people, long lost brothers and sisters or brothers, reuniting after decades? And of course, this is what humanity is all about, heartwarming and the touch that reconnects people. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories and segments that pertain to you, us and Pakistan. Stay tuned for more. Allah Hafiz.